Today, we're diving into a pretty grim subject, but it's one that's governed by some very precise science. In this explainer, we're going to break down the complex mechanics behind execution by hanging.
So, how does it actually cause death? The first thing that probably comes to mind is suffocation, but that's really only half the story. The scientific reality is, well, it's a lot more complex than that.
The answer really splits down two completely different scientific paths. One is this calculated, almost instantaneous event that's all engineered by physics. The other is a much grimmer biological process. So let's break them both down.
But before we explore those two paths, we've got to understand the fundamentals, because this whole process is about so much more than just a rope. It's really a collision between physics and human anatomy.
First off, let's just talk about the context here. The method we're analyzing is a form of capital punishment. That's a legal process where the state actually sanctions death as the penalty for a crime. Understanding this is really key to seeing why one of these paths was engineered with such precision.
And right here, this is the core distinction. On one side, you have judicial hanging, where the goal, the entire point, is an instantaneous death from a cervical fracture. And on the other side, you have what happens when things go wrong, a much, much slower death by asphyxia. Two paths, two completely different mechanisms.
Okay, so let's examine path 1, instantaneous death. This is the method treated as a pure science, engineered by the state to get a swift and predictable result.
The key word here, really, is engineering. A judicial hanging is designed from the ground up to cause immediate death through one very specific event, a severe spinal cord injury. And to make that happen, it is all about the physics.
The process is almost chillingly methodical. First, there's a calculation to figure out the exact drop distance needed, and this is based on a person's weight and height. That specific drop then generates a precise amount of force, which leads to the intended result, a fracture of the cervical vertebrae. It's literally a formula designed for a specific outcome.
And to be really precise, the cervical vertebrae are those 7 bones in your neck that protect the spinal cord. The whole point of a judicial hanging is to target the second and third of these bones. A fracture right there effectively severs the spinal cord, and that instantly cuts all communication between the brain and the rest of the body.
But what happens when all those precise calculations just aren't there? Well, that brings us to path 2, a much slower and tragically different end.
See, if the drop is too short or if there's no drop at all, the physics of what's happening changes completely. Death is no longer caused by that quick spinal injury. Instead, it becomes a biological struggle for oxygen.
The scientific term for this is asphyxia. It's a state where the body is deprived of oxygen, which then leads to unconsciousness and eventually death. So, in this scenario, the rope doesn't break the neck. Instead, it compresses the arteries and the trachea, cutting off blood flow and air to the brain.
So, in a nutshell, this second path is all about compression, not fracture. It's what happens in improper hangings. It restricts oxygen to the brain, and it results in a fundamentally different and slower process of death.
Now, both of these paths, they leave behind evidence, and that's exactly where forensic science comes in. The aftermath of a hanging presents this series of clues that investigators have to carefully decipher.
For any forensic investigator, every scene starts with the same huge question. Was this a suicide, a homicide, or some kind of tragic accident? In these cases, the body itself holds the most important clues.
And forensic medicine is the discipline that reads those clues. It uses all the physical evidence, both on the body and at the scene, to try and reconstruct those final moments and figure out the manner of death.
Investigators are looking for some really specific things. The ligature mark itself is critical. For example, an upward angle often points to suspension. The knot is another piece of the puzzle. A simple, common knot might suggest someone did it themselves, but a really complex one could mean another person was involved. And finally, the whole scene is examined for any signs of a struggle, a note, or just anything that seems out of place. Every little detail tells part of the story.
So you see, the crucial point here is that the body tells a story, and it's a story that science can read. Every piece of physical evidence helps build a narrative of those final moments, letting investigators distinguish between tragedy, malice, or self-harm.
And that really brings us full circle. We've seen how science can analyze death forensically, but we've also seen how it's been used to engineer death with such chilling precision. So it leaves us with one final thought. When we apply science to perfect a method of death,
What does that reveal about our search for certainty and control, even over life's final moments?